Minister, thank you. Firstly, let's go to the big announcement on Infrastructure Australia. As I said, publicly, it's fair to say you've inherited a few doozy agencies, not the two that are up here, they're the two exemplar federal agencies I know, but you inherited a few and still inherited a few to sort out. IA, having been there at the birth and watched it come through and played different roles in and out, what essentially do you want? Do you want it being an assurance agency over money you hand out? Do you want it being advisory? Do you want it to be part of, what do you want it to do?
So the first thing is I want to make sure that how do I know when you're as a minister coming into office, how do you know that the investments that you are making in infrastructure are the right ones? You get a lot of incoming. You get, every one of the 500 or so local government areas in the country have all got a list. Every state government's got a list. Every private sector agency's got a list. And I reckon over the course of today, you've heard lots of lists and lots of projects and lots of things.
We've got a list, trust me.
Yeah, everybody has. So, and I sometimes used to say, I wonder if, every appointment I had, if I just started to write down the dollar amounts of what people are asking for and just, had that up on the whiteboard so that the next person could see, oh, that person's asked for, and it's often, in my portfolio, it's billions we're talking about. So trying to make those decisions about, where, we don't have, particularly with the budget that we've inherited with $1 trillion of debt, like we, in the fastest area that of budget that is growing at the moment is our down payment on debt, and we've got to fix that. And Jim and Katie are doing a really sterling job, and it's hard to do. So how do I make decisions about investment? And so IA really is the body that I should be able to rely on to say, okay, we're in New South Wales. If we want to put X billion dollars into New South Wales, where is that next transformational project? Whether it's from economic development, whether it's from connectivity, livability, trying to deal with issues around congestion, trying to deal with infrastructure deficits, what is that? And that's really what I want from them, to be able to give me that clear, sharp advice, not a list of 150 projects that have basically been through good cost-benefit analysis. Then there is also the assurance piece, which I think has been missing from infrastructure projects nationally, really being able to get that. So those two things.
And she's not kidding. Minister just showed me the 5 pages of Western Sydney priority projects, and literally in small type currently.
And they're the ones we're funding currently.
Yeah. So there's plenty of that. David Higgins. So David Higgins was here this morning. I'm sure he greeted you, the front page of the Herald this morning with his views on, which I think in his defence was, he certainly has a view that high-speed rail is an intra-city thing rather than an intercity thing, and I don't necessarily disagree with him. We've got Albo back. One of his passions has been, I've been on the journey with for that many years about high-speed rail. We have fast rail, faster rail, very fast rail. We'd like to determine in Sydney. Just give us the vibe. There's a whole lot of work needs to be done and testing up and proving. Is the starting point you'd still like to see one high-speed train from Brisbane to Melbourne? Well, or where are we at? And how does we get it either way? We're in the middle of it, so we know we're going to get some of it. But what do you think?
So the first thing is, if you want to do high-speed rail, you actually have to start doing something. Like, you can't just sit there and go, we've talked about it for ages, we've done a few business cases, you've actually got to do something. So the first thing we've done is legislate the High-Speed Rail Authority. So that's now gone through the Parliament in our first 6 months. So that's established. We'll appoint the chair, a very small expert board to that quickly. It's got $500 million on the table to start with, which is really around planning, redoing the business cases, etc. The focus really for us to start with is that Newcastle to Sydney piece. There's money that the New South Wales government has also got on the table for faster rail, and as has the Commonwealth. So there's actually potentially around $2 billion that's already there on the table to start this project. So our first task is really to look at proof of concept for this section and to really deliver and do that. Across the board, what we want to do is, of course, have a Brisbane-Melbourne high-speed rail right down the east coast with a settlement strategy around those areas, creating new towns, new population centres, new opportunities for the private and public sector to actually look at where new jobs are in regional communities right the way along that corridor, as well as the sort of particularly the Melbourne-Sydney route. But the biggest issue for me is also around decarbonisation of transport. We know for aviation, sorry about both Western Sydney Airport, and I think you had Sydney Airport here maybe a few people before, is that on those short-haul domestic flights, people are increasingly in Europe are not wanting to fly because of their carbon footprint. And so we are seeing high-speed rail and public transport particularly as a way of decarbonising people's business travel particularly, and you know, hopefully in the future other travel. We don't have a choice here in Australia about our travel. If we want to fly overseas, we have to fly overseas.
A long swim.
You know, we used to be able to. You know, none of us have got time to go on those long cruises to go to Europe. Any, you know, as you know, our grandparents may have done, or may have only come one way. So that's really the issue for us. Is it actually helps add to decarbonisation, and that's what you're seeing in European countries. That's what they're using.
You mentioned Western Sydney Airport. You're also the Minister, obviously the Minister for Aviation, beyond infrastructure, specifically for aviation. It'd be remiss of me if I didn't say we are cheer squad for what in regulation terms, and for those of you, the concept of open skies. We are championing the fact that Western Sydney Airport might be designated by the government one of the regional airports, therefore it's not burdened by the it's allowed the open skies concept, cabotage, etc. For us, I think it's the starting point to making that airport get off to a flying start. There's a lot of work need to be done, Simon and the team and the board, to go and attract airlines to want to fly here. It's wonderful having an airport, but no one lands there. They come pretty white elephants soon after. So support you in the 24-hour nature. We'll always back that in because it needs to be. Support you as the more fine grain flight paths go out to the space, and fingers crossed Air Services Australia discovered how to deal with human communities when they talk about that and consult properly. But importantly for us, it's giving it a head start by freeing it up to attract any airlines in the world to want to fly there, because we're going to need what we can to get underway. Wendy, I don't expect you to answer that now, if you great, but what's the process of how we can actually formally get in front of you to?
Yeah, well, you have just now. It'd be no surprise the chairperson of the Western Sydney International Airport has also raised this issue with me recently as well. And I've got 3 roles when it comes to the airport. I'm a shareholding minister, so I want it to make a lot of money so we can get our money back, basically. We're very keen to do that. I'm also the planning minister, so I have to give planning approval. I also regulate, so I regulate the airspace and make sure that it stays safe and flight paths and all of those things. So as you say, I've got a sort of 3 core roles in terms of the airport itself. We want it to succeed, and those decisions will, you know, we're successively, you know, making our way through each of those. I think the airspace and flight paths will be the sort of next big piece that will come out for public consultation and discussion, and that's going to be really challenging for lots of communities across the West. And we've seen, people understand and realise that noise actually is a really significant issue for people. I think the Prime Minister appreciates that deeply, probably more than most, as you said. So that's probably the next big issue, and the departments we're going out to international markets in terms of airlines at the moment, and starting to talk about that from a sort of relations point of view. One of our monopoly providers, Qantas, doesn't always like us opening it up so much, but we'll see.
Yeah, they're not big on open skies. I should mention Daniel Jarosh from Bankstown Airport out the back too. She's your planning minister as well, Daniel, so there's the private airport, but still the public planner. Let me flip to the other side. Having had a unique experience, being appointed by the government to help advise on the site for Badgerys, and then having spent 4 years on the Moorebank Intermodal Board, or as I like to call it, Sydney's Inland Port. Western Sydney's Inland Port. One of the challenges you have inherited is the very expensive Inland Rail project, and good luck and Godspeed on making your way through that. That impacts us, probably less extent the intermodal here, but beyond. But that concept of intermodals, of government involvement in the process, where do you see that for Western Sydney, a warehousing future, logistics future is a large part of our operation?
I think the big thing for the Commonwealth, and a bit of a change, although Moorebank's sort of championed this, and something that obviously we started when we were last in government as well, is really the investments from the Commonwealth have to be in that common user infrastructure, so that enabling infrastructure, rather than trying to pick particular businesses and pick winners. It's actually trying to enable lots of business and economic activity around a precinct. And so whether that is from a social and community infrastructure point of view or an industrial precinct, that is really what our role should be. It shouldn't be to support one player over another. And so we've sort of wound back a bit in terms of some of the direct grant grants from my portfolio, the industry portfolio, obviously through the Reconstruction Fund, housing portfolio through the National Housing Accord and the Future Housing Fund. Lots of opportunities for private investment there. My portfolio is much more looking at those common user facilities. We don't want to sort of create monopoly players with economic opportunity, and the intermodals, I guess, are classic examples of how we do that.
Just a couple to wind up and let you get home. Roads. The government before put a roads package with the airport and gave us the fandangled M12 we probably didn't need, but it's a wonderful federal trophy road. We've launched today for the state government for both sides, and last night with Chris Minns as well, the requirement of some just little, relatively small roads. I say that lightly, there's still millions of dollars, but they're in road terms relatively small, to open up some job generating sites. We're looking at the state election and a federal budget almost very soon after it as a dual funding piece for Western Sydney within. But I did want to pay tribute to the Castlereagh, whatever you call it, as long as you pay for it, you can call it whatever you like. But the Castlereagh connection, which for those who don't know is the road that pretty much goes from the corner of the M7, M2 up towards Richmond. It's for us potentially a way to get over the mountains, a little cheaper than that National Party dream of under the mountains. Particularly, it's a way to manage flood evacuation issues with the things around it. You agreed to fund a business case through the election, and you've lived that commitment. Where do we go next on that?
Well, the first thing is we want to see the business case, so we need to actually do that. So that money's been freed up in the October budget. We'll talk to the New South Wales government about how we go about doing that, and whether we do it ourselves, whether we get IA to do it, or whether the New South Wales government wants to take carriage of that. So we'll work through that. So that's really the channel or pathway into federal funding, but as we'll also seek advice from Infrastructure Australia about that. The panel overall, in particular, what I want, it will include roads. So I think it's important that you know that you will already have put your views to many of the members already who are also part of your membership, and we'll have that. The challenge for us is going to be, and this is partly what I wanted the panel to do, is again, just not having this massive list of things that is really difficult for us to fund. We need to be really clear about what are the critical pieces and the missing pieces. We have funded down at the local level smaller scale projects on road safety, on a range of other things, so we're not adverse to doing that, but I've got to get a sense that they're really the missing pieces of the thing, that if you did this, then this would improve particular things. And congestion is really difficult. You build something here and then you just move the problem over somewhere else. So, I'm cautious about projects that do that. I'm interested in projects that actually just unlock and allow, road traffic to flow, or improve safety, or improve connectivity. So have a look at it from that lens.
I know Patricia from the Hawkesbury's over there, and the Hawkesbury Council, it's good for $10-15 of it as well. So don't say local government won't contribute, but we'll open up the Hawkesbury to the Highlands. It's a big place, Greater Western Sydney. Let me finish with one of the things we've crusaded on, I know is deep in understanding the portfolio, is the concept of social legacy for infrastructure. I don't mean to diminish the actual legacy, the mobility legacy, the economic productivity through transport as a mode, absolutely, and it's a very expensive legacy. But we're greedy and we want a bit more. We want to make sure that the literally $150 billion that federal and state governments are putting into Western Sydney gives us more than just the tarmac and the hospital, and that's whether it's Indigenous engagement, and not only do we recognise the Wongal and or Darug, we're on the border of Wongal and Darug people where we sit today. I proudly stood in this room in October with the Prime Minister and declared on behalf of our patrons that we would actively campaign for the Voice to Parliament, Uluru Statement from the Heart, to go beyond just acknowledgement, but to do something for Indigenous engagement. But using your massive budgets you've got in infrastructure, a couple of things out of those legacy I want to pick on for you to finish with. One, we're calling on the federal government when dealing with your department that when you're putting $50, $100 billion down on the table with state governments, can you please make sure they commit to putting more social and affordable housing as part of that project, and ongoing, because we're going to keep driving that. We're sick of 5% targets. That's frankly bullshit. It's a 30% minimum we're talking about now to try and make up the difference. And I'm assuming that's a get your support. But the one specifically we're really committed to as an organisation is driving women in engineering and women in infrastructure. You are now the poster girl for all people who aspire, the Federal Minister of Infrastructure, first female federal minister. And what do you think you can achieve in that process to get the hard hats, from white collar to blue collar? There's an awful amount of jobs, and there's one question said before was that there's often more Daves on a people named Dave than women in total. It was a great question. How do you think you can change that in your time frame?
Yeah, thank you. Well, the great thing is that that whilst I might be the federal first female federal infrastructure minister, we've got an amazing, Jacinta Allen, Eva Lawler, Rita Safiotti, and am I forgetting anyone? I think in terms of the state roads minister, Natalie here as well. So, there's actually lots of women at that senior level in terms of the infrastructure portfolio. So that's a good thing. Part of the Jobs and Skills Summit and part of the IR legislation that just passed the Parliament is the establishment of a national construction forum to try and deal with some embedded issues within the construction sector around gender equity, gender employment, around skills and training, getting more engineers. So it's actually now a legislated forum that Tony Burke, I and Ed Husick will sort of co-chair, depending on which one of us is available at the time. So the construction sector has particularly asked for that. There are huge amounts of work that they're already doing around trying to get women into engineering, and I think Ed had counted, in his portfolio and across the country, there are over 300 different programs that are trying to get women into STEM, and we are not doing well. So he's undertaking in his portfolio an evaluation and review of all of those at the moment, and trying to look at how, what's happening with that. And so there's work happening, but it has been a really tough and difficult issue to crack. It's got to, the workplaces have to be, workplaces that people want to work in. It means the construction sector has to think differently about how its hours of work, its type of workplace. It's got a big transformation itself that it's got to do as well, and we're happy to be there with it.
I got a 6-year-old who just asked for the Barbie Tonka truck set. So there's hope. If I can inculcate Barbie on a work site, we're getting her out of the frozen era into construction phase. So I think that's amazing.
I think Lego helps to start as well.
She's big on Lego. That's me. Hamish looms large in our house. Importantly, as I said, we've just finished a piece of work. Luke Turner, I pay tribute in our office, who's driving that with many of the people in the room and organisations about the social legacy and how we embed it. It's good to talk about. It's easy to do. It's very hard to entrench. I think I'm asking every state bureaucrat, have you ever actually sanctioned a bidder who didn't follow through on their promise for Indigenous jobs, women engineering, great public art, public housing, you name it. And we want to load it up without loading up the price. So we're conscious that we want cheaper infrastructure and we want more legacy out of it, and to get that balance right. But I think only with the strong political voice of the federal government, or I should say financial voice, the ATM, to be able to change culture around long-term social enterprise and pipelines. So it's not one project finishes, that Aboriginal barista's out of work again. I hope in 3 years' time another thing comes up, how we can mandate that across the sector.
So the National Partnership Agreements, which is the mechanism through which the Commonwealth funds the states and territories for the infrastructure investment pipeline, they're up for renewal in 2024. So discussions, particularly, we went to the election with a procurement policy that does, mandate local content, mandates local jobs, 1 in every 10 jobs being on construction sites being apprentices.
And representing a regional electorate, I understand this well.
All of that stuff. So the National Partnership Agreement renegotiation actually provides an opportunity for some of that. But again, they are only as good as their enforcement. And you're right. Every time I have to sign off on releasing money for a project, I have to sign off on the Indigenous employment percentage, and that we do that, and that has driven some increase. But I think there's much more we can do in that sort of social space.
We make it sustainable Indigenous employment. I want to thank you very much to Minister King, I said the member for Ballarat, amongst everything else, who has had a tumultuous time since the state election. I think the loss of your father, the COVID straight after, it was a rough introduction to in a fair time in opposition to finally become the minister, and then the hurdles you've overtaken. I said then you inherited a Department of Infrastructure with a certain National Party legacy that you're finding your way through. Like it or not, you probably raised expectations. That budget in May next year is a Western Sydney infrastructure budget, and we like raised expectations here, don't we, people? And you can guarantee we will be knocking on Sarah Hill's door and her panel, coming to you to putting sensible solutions rather than problems to go forward. We're almost with the tinge that we, the social legacy out of that infrastructure is for a region like ours is so important. So,
Yeah, thanks for having me.
please join me in thanking Catherine King. Thank you very much.